All right, we're 3 minutes into the webinar and this session is being recorded, so let's begin. A very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us today from across the GCC, possibly also Africa, South Asia. Thank you so much for making the time for this. We know it's one of the busiest times of the year and we're winding down for the summer, but we really appreciate you joining us for this really important conversation, something to think about as we prepare for the new academic year. So the title of this webinar, as you now know so well, is Transforming Professional Development in the GCC with AI-assisted tools, and it is a long title, so we'll unpack it today with our lovely panelists. But first, why are we having this conversation? I think this is no surprise to anyone on this call. Teachers are among the most powerful influences in learning. A powerful quote from no other than John Hattie from his book Visible Learning from 2009. So teachers are what drive learning. They are the lifeblood of schools. And so it's really important to not just support you, empower you, but also make sure that your development is being considered throughout the academic year. Another powerful quote from OECD and their Teaching and Learning International Survey: the quality of teaching is the single most important factor in school influencing student performance. So we have this coming out from reports as well. And finally, a little bit of insight from the Learning Policy Institute, Linda Darling-Hammond, another popular figure in education. Only a fraction of PD is effective in improving teaching practice. And the key outcome of this, a key finding of this research was that most PD is too brief, fragmented, or disconnected. So we're guessing the reason many of you are here today is because you found this to be the case as well. And not only are we finding that traditional PD practices can fall short of expectations, but also with all the new expectations that are coming in with technological advances, increased diversity in the classroom, the need for inclusion, we do need to rethink the way we approach professional development. To contextualize the conversation a bit further, although our panelists will do that for us as well, here are a couple of interesting insights into what different bodies are saying about PD in our region. First, we're going to hear from the World Bank, their MENA Education flagship report. Professional development in MENA often lacks focus, follow-up, and connection to student outcomes. So this was a big picture overview of what they observed in the region. It is a bit dated, but still relevant. Interestingly now, if we go through something such as DSIB inspection framework reports, I think many of our educators on this call will be very familiar with the UAE inspection framework and KHD inspection. So how does this topic relate to that? In many inspection cycles, DSIB has noted, the Dubai Schools Inspections Bureau has noted, PD is too generic. There is limited follow through to improve classroom instruction. And they also found that effective PD was more common in high performing schools that embedded coaching and peer observation. Going a bit further into this, the Irtika framework from ADIC highlights the importance of sustained, evidence-informed PD linked to teacher needs. Schools with fragmented or infrequent PD were marked down in inspection categories. So we are developing a strong sense of what PD works and what doesn't work, but then what do we actually do about it? So this conversation is going to go through that flow with different perspectives from our panelists. But first, a little bit about who is hosting this webinar and why we're doing so. So my name is Bushra. I'm the head of education services at EduEnhance. We're based in the UAE and we've been serving schools across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia for the past 6 years. What do we do? So we have been known for the longest time as distributors of Curriculum Associates. They are an education publisher based in the US that provide cutting edge programs for ELA and math. We also provide exclusively their Brigance stream of products in the region for early childhood screening and assessment, special education, etc. And given our work in the region, and our founder is going to speak to this shortly as well, given our work in the region, we realized that just providing curriculum and resources isn't enough. And so we've shifted our focus towards professional development as well and started thinking very deeply about how to support schools in ways that creates lasting impact. And that's what led us to find IRIS Connect. IRIS Connect to us is one of the most advanced PD facilitation systems that we have come across that supports pre-PD holistically. So it's not just an LMS where you get training courses, and it's not just a coaching tool. It kind of enables different types of PD all through one platform through key features called pathways, which give you control over both process and content of PD. They are GDPR compliant and allow you to leverage video for observations and reflections. They allow you to integrate custom frameworks through their insights feature. And they also feature, recently, they've added dozens of new technique guides that I absolutely love to the platform as well. So you can embed that into your pathways and courses. It probably sounds like a bit of jargon right now, but we're going to unpack further and see as to what these terms mean and how they relate to evidence-based PD. And to help us with that, we have our panelists here today who are going to help us unpack this topic. I'd like to introduce them briefly before we dive into the discussion. A little note for our attendees, we invite you to share your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you can press on that and you can put in your questions over there, and we'll do our best to keep track of them. We've allocated some time towards the end of this webinar for your questions to be discussed. So please hang around for that. And also, please do hang around for the feedback form towards the end of this session, in which we'll note down your details and also issue your certificates of attendance accordingly. So we hope you're going to stick with us for the rest of the webinar. So with that, I'm going to briefly introduce our lovely panel. First of all, Mr. Andy Newell, who is the founder of IRIS Connect, the visionary. Perhaps among all of us, he felt the greatest need and urgency to bridge the gap between evidence-based practices for professional development and classroom impact. Next, we have Ms. Irum Farooq, the founder and CEO of EduEnhance, who has been in the education sector for more than 2 decades, first as an educator, then as a founder of learning centers, bringing blended learning into the GCC region, and now as the founder and CEO of EduEnhance. We're also joined by Ms. Josephine Butler, who is a senior education specialist with over 2 decades of experience in leadership, policy development, supporting schools with inspections. She was also working with ADIC for a long time and supporting school improvement across the board. Then we have Ms. Vesna Belogaska, who is the Director of Business Development at IRIS Connect, one of the founding team members at IRIS Connect, who truly took the platform international and helped make it more relevant to different regions as well, whether it's Europe, Australia, the US, and now the GCC. And finally, Ms. Shameem Manuel, who's also had more than over 15 years of experience now in the GCC alone, leading schools, transforming schools, and empowering educators. Her work spans private schools, ADIC schools, and now charter school, Janaen Charter School in Elaine. Thank you all for joining us today. And yes, I will be your moderator. So the format of this panel is because we have so many different voices that are giving us perspective, whether from a developer point of view for solutions or a government point of view. We're going to focus on 5 key questions in this panel and then look at it from different lenses. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right, and now we have all our panelists in focus. And we're going to get started with the first question. So let's put the challenge into context first. What are the most urgent professional development needs in GCC schools today, from the classroom to the system level? And this is where we think it might be best to start with Ms. Josephine, who can bring in more of a policy and government perspective, especially given her work with ADIC. So without further ado, over to you, Ms. Josephine. From ADIC's view, what key priorities are emerging for schools?
So thank you for that, and thank you for the lovely introduction as well. Having been in the GCC, in specifically the UAE now for nearly 3 decades, I can tell you things have definitely changed since I came here first. However, one of the biggest things that teachers in schools in this part of the world need support with right now is moving away from that traditional lecture style, teacher-centered approach to a more student-centered and active learning. A lot of classrooms, and I've been in not just to support schools, but also as an inspector, and it's very evident a lot of classrooms still rely on memorizations. memorization, and students really need to be more involved. They need to be asking questions, solving problems, and working collaboratively. And teachers need those tools to make learning more engaging, whether it's through group projects or hands-on activities, or better ways to assess the progress that students are making. We also need teachers to bring in 21st century skills into the classroom. Now, I know we've heard the buzzwords: critical thinking, creative thinking, digital literacy, so important now in this age of AI. But these are really important skills for students to succeed in the fast changing world that students find themselves, especially in the UAE, which reacts very quickly to change, I must say, and other places like Saudi Arabia. And teachers need support on how to build them into their lessons in a way that is meaningful and impactful. And just moving away from the school teachers, school leaders also play a huge role too, and they need to move away from not just managing schools, but more taking on more of a coaching role and supporting teachers. And when leaders know how to guide instruction and mentor and follow up with their teams, the whole system will change. And I think there are many others that we could focus on, but I think those three areas would help students thrive in today's world if we start focusing and build a foundation from there.
I love how you've commented on how the shift we need in the classroom also has to start with a shift in leadership, and how leadership has to move towards coaching and mentorship. So very natural transition then, handing it over to Ms. Shameem to speak to, what do you see as a leader as being the most pressing needs for your teachers, as being the most critical challenges with effective professional development in the GCC right now?
Thanks, Bushra. Again, as Josephine said, thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I think that Miss Josephine has just hit the nail right on the head. I think what our teachers need, or what they don't need, let me rather start with that, Bushra, is that they don't need more one-off workshops that are going to relate to the 21st century skills, or how to focus on becoming a student-centered classroom, etc., as Miss Josephine highlighted. They need ongoing job-embedded professional learning that supports teachers in, reaching every learner. And I think that is also what Ms. Josephine was leading to, that having a student-centered classroom will allow us to have students achieve so much more, or reach their targets that we set as educators in the classroom. And it also builds that, it brings the best out of each teacher when you embed that within ongoing job coaching or mentoring or things like that. Right now, I think for our school, or for me, the real focus is that there's two areas, both in the classroom and, like Ms. Josephine also mentioned, across the system, that coaching, that mentoring, and that instructional leadership that is required within our schools. And if I think I think everyone on the school may agree that teachers are doing their best in classrooms that are, we have more diverse learners in our classrooms that we need to challenge academically, linguistically, as well as culturally, looking at, if you look at the GCC countries or UAE specifically. But many teachers, and I think this is where my teachers have been asking me, but how do I reach every student and keep the whole class moving forward? The demands are so much more. And what we felt when we analyzed, going through classroom observations and looking at the data and seeing where can we move our kids to the next level, it came back to that support that the teachers need in order to differentiate and create an inclusive environment where we can respond to our English language learners, or students of determination for that matter, but not more theory, but tools, like Ms. Josephine also mentioned, the tools, the strategies, and then the coaching that actually makes the difference in that classroom. When I think across the system, I mean, you need to grow strong instructional leaders. And as myself, being a leader in a school, you need to actually understand how to coach, how to mentor, and you need to know how to use these tools or strategies in the classroom that is going to support our teachers and ultimately the learners at the end of the day. So across our school, and especially in the middle leadership level, there's a real need for PD that builds confidence and clarity in leading learning. If that makes sense. Leaders need to know how to coach teachers, guide meaningful reflection. And I think you mentioned that as well, Bushra, about the research that has shown that we need to have a clear focus and that follow-up and that connection to how we actually embed it within our teaching and the learning within our schools. And yes, it's compliance, but it's not just compliance as well. You know, I think we need to also just, yes, there's a framework, yes, there's things, but if we comply to the framework, yes, we will still develop our teachers and their pedagogy and their methodologies. Whether it's through peer coaching, structured walkthroughs, or shared lesson study, I think, and schools will then thrive. Where leaders know how to support people and not just the systems, I think, yeah.
Thank you so much, Shameem, for giving that hands-on perspective. If I can put you on the spot slightly, how would you describe coaching to this audience? What does coaching mean to you as an instructional leader or as a leader in a school?
Well, the model that I've developed in my school is more about the teacher leads, is the leader of their own learning, and the coach is there not as a guide, but to tell them exactly what they need to do in order to improve. It's not, oh, I think you should be doing this. It's no, 1, 2, 3 is the steps that you need to take in order to improve. So from a coaching model perspective, I think that there should be some type of accountability and responsibility that is on the teacher, allowing the coach to step in order to instruct them in a way forward to improve their abilities or the pedagogy or methodologies that they have.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. And I'm excited to see how this understanding is going to evolve over the course of our webinar. I'd now like to invite Irum to share her perspective based on your understanding, Irum, of what you saw, gaps you saw in the region. What led you to seek out a PD solution for EduEnhance to bring to the region?
Thank you, Bushra. Thank you all so much for being here today, our wonderful panelists and the attendees. We truly appreciate you being here because at the end of all our endeavors, the whole idea is to understand the needs of our educators where we live. We call UAE our home. We serve the educators, the leaders, all stakeholders in the education arena in the region. So first of all, I'll just give a bit of perspective about, why we are doing what we are doing. Personally, I've been in the education sector for the last 2 decades, and out of which 15 years have been spent in the UAE. And having lived here, having been, a part of the whole landscape, we realize that we are bringing in lots of solutions for children. So we are distributors for curriculum associates. They have cutting edge programs where we offer personalized learning and intervention to students using a blended learning approach. So we have all these cutting edge, powerful, award-winning solutions for children where we focus on an approach which is not one size fits all. We are trying to offer customized solutions for every child. But while we do that, we realize that we need to have a similar approach for teachers. Teachers are pretty much the most important stakeholders in all that we do. So the more we started going into school buildings, the more we started talking to regulators, to educators, to school leaders, we realized that there is a huge need to acknowledge that our teachers are doing a heavy lifting like no other when they're in the classroom. I've been a teacher myself, so I know the hard work that goes into effective teaching. And luckily, we are in a region where education is given top priority, which means that we have to be moving with times, we have to keep up with the technology. Just recently, the UAE government announced that AI curriculum would be rolled out in schools across all grade levels, starting age 4. Now, it's amazing. It's beautiful how we are keeping up with times. There are resources available. There are experts available. But at the end of the day, we do know that there are teachers who are trying to keep up with all these expectations. And teachers are facing, it's a tall order. It's a huge ask for them. There's lots on their plates already. So what do we do to make their lives a bit easier? How do we empower them? How do we make sure that the learning they are receiving is also personalized, like we offer to students? So we started looking for solutions for PD as well. And after reviewing quite a few platforms, and I must say that there's massive work going on in this area, and we did see a lot of good things happening. But when we saw IRIS Connect, it just resonated with us. It just gave us that solution that we were looking for, that's flexible, that's self-directed, for teachers, giving it opportunities for AI-assisted coaching, peer collaboration. There was so much in that platform, but at the heart of it all, it was the teacher and how the teacher would feel comfortable and empowered in going on this journey with the platform. So that was pretty much a little story on how we brought IRIS Connect to the region. And we are super excited because of the flexibility the team at IRIS Connect is also showing us in terms of understanding what our local needs are and then giving us solutions accordingly.
Thank you so much, Josephine, Shameem, and Irum, for sort of setting the stage and giving us insight into what is going on in our region. We were very keen to have a region-specific conversation, but now let's step out of the context a little bit and look at the bigger picture in terms of, we've talked about PD that isn't working. Now let's unpack PD that is working based on latest research and evidence. So now I'd like to invite Andy actually to share his story. What research led to the creation of IRIS Connect, and what has come out for you as the ideal or a sustainable PD model?
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic. Yeah, no, wonderful to be invited, and it's lovely to be on the panel with so many esteemed members and so many wonderful attendees. So, in terms of the sort of evolution of IRIS Connect and the intersection with research, it's quite a personal story because I used to do training in classrooms. I worked for an interactive whiteboard company. I worked with I don't know if anyone remembers those little kind of voting tools that students could use in the classroom, and I would go out regularly, engage with teachers and show them how to use all these things. And I to be honest, I thought I was a pretty good trainer because I did all of the things you're supposed to do as a trainer. The problem was that when I went back sort of 6 months later, it was very rare that there was sort of sustainable transformation having happened in that classroom. Quite often those technologies or those approaches would be gathering dust in a cupboard. Now, and it wasn't just about the technology. Obviously, some of the work that I was doing was working into the space of pedagogy, looking at the the importance of formative assessment, etc. And again, a lot of those themes were lacking. And so I went to the University of Sussex and I said, am I a bad trainer? And they said, no, you're an average trainer, which I've never really known whether that was a compliment or not. The point being is that they then shared with me all of the research that we've touched on and the papers that we've touched on, talking about how the sort of traditional modality of how we may seek to develop a teacher and build their efficacy is broadly ineffective and has been since we started doing it. I think the simple way to summarize that kind of research is that recognizing that professional development is a process, not an event. That process can involve events, but we need to conceptualize it as a long-term iterative process, working hand in hand with teachers to help them grow and develop. Specifically, to sort of capture that, one of the most influential pieces of educational research in the space of professional development then started to form the backbone of this analysis of what's going wrong. And that was by Bruce, Joyce and Beverly Showers. It's actually sort of, I think it was 2001, actually, a very, very old piece of research. But what they showed was, and this is via a meta-analysis, so this is taking lots of randomized control trials and synthesizing them together to get a big picture. What they identified was that there are certain experiences, certain mechanisms, learning interactions that teachers need to have in order to see that change in practice, and that each one of them is necessary but insufficient on its own. So we need to have access to the theory. We need to have access to that in a way that's digestible and realistic within the busy context of classrooms. It's not okay to just go and dump a large randomized controlled trial paper on a teacher's desk and expect them to be able to interpret, absorb and apply everything that's in there. So it needs to be, the right information at the right time, it pitched in a way that makes sense to teachers in busy classrooms. The second thing we need is the ability to see that. So if we're talking about changing practice, using new tools, using new approaches to questioning, etc., as a teacher, I need to see someone model that to me. I need to see it demonstrated. And ideally, I need to see a little bit more than just the physical of what happened and when. I need to understand the connections between the theory and what I'm seeing. I need to understand what the teacher's noticing, what they're deciding. A sort of a three-dimensional model of practice. Thirdly, of course, I need to have a go. I need to practice that myself. Now, there are sort of two different ways that practice can happen. One is in a decontextualized environment, so outside of the classroom, almost sort of walking through the process so that I get a really clear mental model of the practice, but that can't stay there. I have to then go and try it in the classroom. That process of trying it in the classroom needs to be rich with feedback because no one gets things right first time round. And also the technique itself or the process that we're using might not be quite right for those learners at that time. So we might need to adapt it and change it. And I need support from another professional in order to be able to do that. Finally, and this is a really crucial part that's sometimes glossed over, is that I need support for the development of my mental model of practice. Now, the way Bruce, Joyce and Beverly Showers framed that was through the lens of coaching. So the capacity to sit and have rich conversations about why did you decide to do that? How could we have adapted it? What do we need to do to meet the needs of those learners moving forward? So those kind of rich meta cognitive conversations that help us embody ultimately the what I think is the most important statement around teacher professionalism, which is really great teachers do the right things, but they do them at the right time and for the right reasons. And so it's more than just developing a technique, it's developing the hand that guides the tool. So professional learning programs need to embody all of those sort of key interactions. And one of the challenges, why don't we just do all this, is so much of that is predicated or requires a free sharing of practice between teachers. If I'm modeling, I need to be able to get a lot of people to be able to see this strategy without all of the disruption to the timetable of lesson observations, cover teaching, etc. Moreover, if I want to have someone observe my lesson and provide me with rich feedback that folds into a coaching conversation, again, that needs to be informed by a physical process of coming in and sitting down at the back and making notes and disrupting the learning environment. And so it was that research that led us to this process of saying, well, how can we just remove those barriers? And of course, video can go an enormously long way to being able to do that because I can record when it suits me, I can share with you and you can review it when it suits you. Then we can come together and have one of those coaching conversations that's going to be rich because we've got a shared record. We can go back and use video effectively as a bit of a time machine to go back and examine the noticing and the decision making that took place in the moment. And so that we can have an explicit conversation about that, about how could that be adapted? How could that be refined, etc. So that's the underlying kind of research that sat behind what we did. Subsequently, there's been some additional research, for example, Sims et al. From the EEF, to summarize that research, underpinning the principle that there are these crucial key mechanisms that sit within coaching and, of course, within professional development more generally. And actually, one of the things they noted was that even though we might center on coaching quite a lot because it's a relatively easy way to embody those sort of key mechanisms, it doesn't, the actual modality, whether it's coaching, whether it's reflection, whether it's collaboration, lesson study, doesn't really matter as long as those interactions are present. So the mechanisms matter more than the modality, whether it be coaching or reflection, etc. One of the last little things I'll just pull out from the research, and this is a more emergent thing which actually validates a lot of what we're saying about kind of mental models, research by sort of psychologists like Gary Klein, and also an analysis by Kraft and Blazar, noted that actually there's quite a tenuous relationship between technique change in teachers and impact on learning. So that's not to say that technique doesn't matter, but it means that if we just focus on using specific techniques, that doesn't necessarily lead to a change in learning. What appears to is a change of cognition for the teacher, a change of the thinking that sits behind the doing. And that's actually illustrated really beautifully by some research that we were involved with in the USA with Mathematica policy research. And what they identified was that this coaching program that we were enabling with video had a 2-month learning gain for students within the year. It was a really significant finding. But what they failed to detect was any significant change in the techniques being used by teachers. And actually, what sat behind that, I believe, is that teachers may not have been using different techniques, but they were now using them at the right times for the right reasons. And that was because they were able to use video and coaching conversations to go back in time and examine thinking, and then to plan accordingly. So I hope that's a relatively holistic view, but obviously a little later on we can take more questions about that.
I've got a page full of notes here based on what you said. So thank you so much for sharing all that. And the last bit was especially interesting. It's new to hear as well. But so a couple of key things I drew from that was the importance of focusing on the process. So far in PD, we've been focusing a lot on content, but now we need to focus on the process, and we need to ensure certain interactions happen in the professional development cycle of a teacher so she gets the chance to develop her understanding, her mental models of instruction. And the last bit that you shared in the end, I interpreted that as like stronger intention, clearer intention behind action, being more present. So really keen to unpack that further. I'd like to now invite Vesna as the person who took IRIS global, so to speak, to speak a little bit to how it's been received globally. And I mean, different cultures, different regions. What are IRIS Connect users saying about the approaches that IRIS Connect brings to schools?
Thank you, Bushra. I'm delighted to be on this panel, and thank you to all of the participants. We have been privileged over the more than 17 years now to have worked with educators from more than 50 countries, and that's across the globe. So I'm not talking just the Western Hemisphere where we are originally based, across 5 continents, like you mentioned. And that obviously involves different cultures, different infrastructure. But what we have been able to do over those experiences is to gladly see that there are certain things that are universal. And one of them is the teacher's motivation to make a difference to the lives of the pupils by providing the best possible teaching that they can. And that certainly has been universal. And the other one is the factors that actually make difference to the teaching practice and influence the learner outcomes. So we've known that from research, as Andy explained, everything that we do has been inspired and informed by research, and it keeps to do so. But largely we also implement what we are learning from our experience. And those things that make actual difference to the practice and therefore to the learner outcomes are Several. One is the PD really needs to be trusted and credible, to come from credible sources that are evidence informed. It needs to be relevant. So it needs to be focused on what Shameem also mentioned, ultimately improving learners' outcomes. It needs to be personalized to the teacher. Again, I think most of the panelists already mentioned the lack of impact from some of CPD programs because they are not as focused or they are too broad. So that sort of personalization to address the individual teacher's needs in their environment while aligning with the whole school objectives and obviously wider in the system. There needs to be, and the PD needs to be ongoing, job embedded and ongoing. So what is really important is to be part of a culture of ongoing learning and support. And that is very much dependent on effective and supportive leadership. So that is the thing that I would really emphasize. I think if I had to summarize it in 2 words, probably trust and culture. So the learning culture that is driven by leadership is key. And what we have seen time and time again is that even though what we have implemented, all of those factors, we are really implementing in the way that we've designed the tools that we offer and the way that we approach the onboarding and adoption. But where it really works is where the schools live by that, I think, quite well-known maxim by Dylan William, where the culture is that every teacher needs to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can always be better.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Vesna. So that's the interesting bit. No matter what part of the world you're in, if you have a culture of motivating educators to want to develop, supporting them adequately in the process, then you're naturally drawn towards resources that facilitate that. So let's get to know IRIS Connect a little bit better, because we're saying we need a shift, and then also saying that IRIS Connect can facilitate that. So I'm going to invite Andy now to speak to key features and aspects of IRIS Connect that facilitate those aspects that you discuss, whether it's from your research or your own experience. How does IRIS Connect shift towards that ideal PD ecosystem and model?
Thank you. Yeah, I would quite like to share my screen to do that. If you bear with me one moment of
Sure.
a little bit of thinking. There we go. Can you see my screen okay?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll just sort of touch initially on this need to be able to mobilize classroom practice so that it's no longer necessarily my practice, it's our practice. And I think that's one of the things that, in terms of the cultural shift, that I think is an important part of that, which is that we all have a stake in improving outcomes. And so we do that, as I say, through the use of video. And I think I'd like to just focus in initially on that element, which is that we've worked really hard to make the process as simple, non-threatening, technically secure as possible, so that the process involves literally, taking the kit out, pressing the start record button, pressing the end record button. So that's how the original kind of learning artifact gets generated, and it's that we'll analyze, and that we'll discuss, and that will form the bedrock of what we do moving forwards. The process itself, obviously, you have a Bluetooth microphone and a tripod. You click on start recording. If at any time while you're teaching I do something that relates to maybe a goal that I've set myself, like asking better questions or managing transitions slightly differently in the classroom, then I can just click on a button on the microphone and it'll automatically mark that moment so I can find it later when I review it. When the video is uploaded onto the system, which just happens automatically at the end of the lesson, you get a little notification when it's ready to review. You log into the platform, and this is what you'll see. You'll see the video ready for playback in the platform itself. So this one's been recorded from 2 angles. It's a lesson with 2 views. You can just pair cameras together to achieve this. And of course, you can interact with it in all the ways you might normally interact with a video. But one of the things that we've sort of done to sort of differentiate it is the ability to bookmark the video. So these comments over here on the right hand side link to a precise moment in the lesson. So if I pause and make a comment, that comment is associated with this moment. So if we're watching this lesson back, that commentary will glow and highlight at that precise moment in time. And actually, this goes to the heart of a really profound principle of what we're doing. And we'll see later that it forms a really important part of our pathways of learning. Principle here is that, firstly, of course, feedback that's actionable and specific and tied to a particular moment is the gold standard. But it's more important than that, which is that if I wanted to share this video with a large group of users because I'm modeling a particular technique or strategy, I can use these comments to explain why I'm doing what you're seeing, what I was noticing, what I was responding to in the moment. And automatically I'm inviting the other participant to share within my mental model of practice, that three-dimensional modeling that I was talking about before. Equally, if your coachee shares a video with you and they've annotated it, you also get to see their mental model of practice, which is a far richer experience than sitting there and identifying particular techniques that weren't necessarily working at that particular time. We need to understand why and the thinking that sat behind it. So that's the fundamental tool set that sits within IRIS. One of the key principles, of course, is that any video can be shared. So I can record my video, share it with my coach, they can annotate it, we can meet later and discuss it. Very, very simple. How we've now brought that together within a pathway of learning is where you'll now start seeing how the experience of the educator in this scenario is touching on those key mechanisms that I was talking about before. So access to accessible theory, models and examples, high quality professional conversation, and feedback. So those sort of components of what we know work being served up in a way that is like just super adaptive and easy to access. So we've embodied the idea of process like a cycle of coaching or like a cycle of reflection through this tool set that we've developed called Pathways. Now, Pathways are designed to provide a sequence of professional development activities and provide guidance for both, say, coach and coachee through every step of that process. The key point about these is that they're infinitely adaptable. We can change them and adapt them to cultural norms, to meet with specific learning objectives, to recognize the amount of time that's physically available to participants. So this is the fundamental unit of value that can be changed and adapted to map it to your specific needs. But we have also provided some templates, not least so I can explain things to you. So to start a pathway, one would click on Start a Pathway. You would select the learning experience that you want to have. You would say, I am the coach, and identify, for example, in this case, who the coachee is, and set a timeline for the activity that we're going to undertake. Once you create a pathway, what it will do is create a shared space for you and the other participant to work through together over time. So this is an AI-assisted reflective coaching pathway. So the idea here is that the coachee is going to undertake a little cycle of reflection before the coaching meeting in order to be able to have a more meaningful coaching meeting when we come together. So within this pathway, you'll see that the first step for the coachee is to share a video that they've recorded of their lesson. So in this scenario, I would share the video comes into the pathway and plays on the page.
Mm-hmm.
The next step, though, and this is where it starts to get interesting, is we're trying to answer that question of, if we're really time poor, how can we use our time more effectively to have more impactful conversations and to engage in more impactful activities? So what this addresses, and I'm sure a lot of people will resonate with this, which is, you know, I'm a leader, I'm time poor, I go in to observe, I might only have 15 minutes to observe a lesson, but I don't know what happened before what I saw or the consequences of what I saw. So what we've done here is used AI to automatically identify the key phases and interactions within this lesson, from the entry routine and the homework check that the teacher undertook, through to the spelling test as their first task activity, through to a quiz on muscles and bones and their use in sports, for example. And what this does is it pulls out within each phase interesting moments that we might want to review. So within this entry routine, the teacher did a homework check and identified that quite a large group of pupils had not completed their homework. If we want to see what that looks like, we click on the button.
So in the interest of time, Andy, if we
Yeah.
were to sort of condense this, put it in a nutshell, what's different with using IRIS Connect for coaching and for those interactions compared to traditional models, just having a coach at school, for example?
Well, a key feature of this would be that you've got the ability to review the video with the support of the AI before the session. So what that means is if you want to look at the lesson through a particular lens, and again, these lenses are completely adaptable to context, you can reflect on moments in the lesson with a reflective question that we've built to be generated by the AI, and review moments of that lesson with that question in mind. And that will help you select an area of focus, something that you want to zero in on within this coaching pathway. Now, this is another key feature, is that the whole rest of the pathway now has adapted based on my specific needs as a learner. So what that means is that it's automatically drawn in, checking for understanding as my area of focus, and it's serving up the accessible theory resources that I need to be able to underpin everything else I do. Equally, I can now engage in the coaching session with the fact that I, as the coach, say, I know that my coachee is arriving having reviewed their video, read the AI statements, etc., prioritized, made a decision around what they want to focus on. And I have had the opportunity to get a holistic view of practice through the timeline tool. So what that means is that we can use the time much more effectively in this coaching session to focus in on those conversations around what were you noticing, what were you responding to, etc. As we go through that process, we'll resolve into a particular challenge, something that we want to address. Now, in that process, again, the pathway has adapted to reflect the fact that we were looking at checking for understanding. So now, when we're in that stage of the coaching session where we're trying to work out what we want to do, it's presenting all of the sort of technique level tools that are going to help address common problems, persistent problems in this space. So what I might do now is, because I wanted the learners, for example, to give me a richer response to my questions, I'm going to select probing questions as a technique. Within here is presenting the overview of the technique, and then ring the bell, a model. So this is a video model of a teacher using that strategy in context. So that's another one checked off the list in terms of those key interactions. And then the last step within this space is the preparation and rehearsal, the deliberate practice that we're going to undertake in order to make that practice, that change, clear in the minds of the teacher, so that when they go back out into the classroom and implement, they'll do so hopefully with fidelity. But one of the key principles at work here is that that's not the end of the story. We can continue to share iteratively, practice back and forth alongside those feedback tools that we saw at the beginning, so we can help the teacher make those little adjustments to make a sustainable change. One last thing I would say, and I will not spend too long on this, is purely that you have the capacity now as a leader to see progress through all of those pathways that are taking place across your organization, whether it's teachers engaging in an individual cycle of reflection, coaching conversations, large groups of teachers collaborating on a shared goal. You can see what themes they're engaging with, the specific techniques that are being developed, the progress within the period, and then the details, the story of each one of those professional development cycles. What was the challenge? What did we do to address it? What was the impact on learning? And of course, because one of the roles of leaders is to try and keep things on track, if we see a scenario where maybe we're sitting quite a long way behind the due date, I have the ability to issue a little reminder from here that will remind the teacher what their next step in their learning journey is. So sorry that was a little longer than maybe scheduled, but I hope you've got a holistic view of what we do now.
Absolutely. So we can see how much more structured the process becomes and how much more scalable it is. So as a coach, I can spend more time potentially with more coachees or make better use of my time with my coachee as well, because I'm able to identify moments of impact. I'd like to now quickly invite Vesna to share, how do school-wide IRIS Connect implementations typically begin? How do they scale? How do they leverage this tool effectively?
We customize the approach. Every school is different, and that's why we always start the journey together with an initial consultation with the leadership in order to understand where they are and meet them where they are with shared goals for the PD and break them down per periods so that we can collectively make co-create an implementation plan, and then to start creating the steps that will lead to achieving those goals with regular checkups. So we use very much the structures that Andy was showing, pathways in all of our interactions. So for example, with the leaders, we have an leadership pathway where we share the goals and the progress being made over time. We also have an induction pathway for the teachers, where they will be familiarized with the different features and resources on the platform. But we would also typically schedule a customized onboarding session, so an initial orientation and technical training for the teachers, and select together with the leaders what pathways they would be taking in a particular term, for example, and then monitor together how that is going on and if there is any need for our PD consultants to provide additional support throughout that process. So we are there along the journey the whole time as a trusted advisor, if you like, and that seems to have worked really well. And this is one of the things that we have learned over the time and over the experience in different cultures, that some of the things that are universal, and we just customize them according so that they can be embedded and they can support the PD curriculum that has been decided for that particular school. And that is the beauty of the customization, of the adaptability of the features and the resources that we have.
Thank you both, Andy and Vesna, for making it so clear and also emphasizing the flexibility and customizability, which is necessary for any PD curriculum to really have impact. I'd now like to invite Shameem to speak to what led you to select IRIS Connect for your school, and how are you looking to use the tool to bridge the gaps that you see?
Thanks, Bushra. I think any institution would want the best for their teachers, the best for their children. And I think one of the things that I wanted to see was a change about the way we talk about teaching, and the shift from reflection from the corridor to the screen, more ideally, where teachers would be able to not just look at, or rather from an antidote to evidence base, and then from isolated practices to shared growth. And I think Andy said it best in terms of, it's not my practice, but as an institution, we then made it our practice as an institution, where we actually look at IRIS Connect with a mindset shift, not just a platform as such. I think we would also all agree that traditional professional development often happens to teachers. It's scheduled, it's generalized, and often disconnected from the classroom. And as Andy also indicated, that there's pathways that could be created, or that can be created, for leaders as well as teachers. And even though we sometimes would like to think that we try to tailor our PDs in collaboration with our consultants, it's often a challenge, to meet the needs of each and every teacher. So you kind of do a blanket PD, and you miss those key things that a particular teacher requires. And therefore, when we did our research, there were three things that I looked at. One was a culture of reflection and not just compliance. I know that compliance drives us in order to achieve things and milestones, or if we want to do a tick box, or those things. But and you mentioned about John Hattie, and I think as our learners in our classroom, our teachers are also learners, and they learn best when they reflect on their own practice and engage in dialogue with their peers, because that's where they ultimately learn. I think the second aspect was that, you want to capture real classroom moments and reflect on them, and sharing these with your colleagues in a safe and supportive space. And I think Andy also spoke about that when he was going through the platform, speaking about how the teacher captures the moment and then shares that with their coach, and the coach is in a discussion or a type of coaching session, looking at what would be the best, or how to capitalize on their teaching methodologies. We wanted to make sure that they are involved in the planning and the evaluation process of the learning. There was relevance specifically to their own experience, and also having the autonomy, I think, and automatically, if they have the autonomy, they take ownership of that, From a leadership perspective, I think we often looked at, as middle leaders, a way to step into true instructional leadership instead of just managing teams. They could now coach with clarity. They have the evidence, it's real classroom-based clips, and they can guide through reflective conversations without the pressure of formal observations. And that is, on-the-job type of learning, I would say, for teachers looking at that. But I think most importantly, Bushra, I think IRIS Connect helped us rebuild trust around our professional growth in our institution. Teachers felt more seen, not judged. They could learn at their own pace, and they can set their own goals. And I think in the new academic year, we're fully going to move with this concept about teachers owning their learning, and then looking at and doing that self-reflection. And I think that would be more powerful. So my belief, it's the real development happens when teachers feel safe and supported and empowered to grow. So that's why we went with IRIS Connect.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation, getting so many different perspectives. I am looking at the time, and I think it's only fair if we could continue for another 10 minutes and just wrap this up appropriately. We can share the feedback form in the chat, so whoever needs to step out can share the feedback and catch the rest of the recording on YouTube. But let's just round this conversation off and give it shape as it deserves to, so we can get all the perspectives in here. So I'd now like to invite Josephine to sort of respond to everything that's been shared in terms of high impact PD models and systems, reflection, process, interaction, all of that. Sort of share from your experience from a regulatory inspections perspective. Does this meet what you're looking for, or what are the expectations from regulators in terms of PD and incorporating these practices? Oh, you're on mute, actually.
Yes. So I think the regulators, whether it be here or in other GCC countries, as you well know, the UAE has its own, they have their own national agenda. Saudi will have their national agenda, and the other countries will also have a national agenda where education is really a central point. So looking at that, any PD that's offered, whether it be from the regulator or from an inspection perspective, the PD should reflect the goals that are set out by the national agenda, whether that be whether it would be the curriculum standards, the moral education, national identity, any of those would have to be considered when thinking about PD and how that PD might be translated into the classroom. The other next thing you'd be looking at would be the evidence of impact on student learning. So, you've talked a lot about what the teacher is doing in the classroom. So when inspectors go into a classroom, they're not necessarily looking at the teacher, they're actually looking at the students. And so that would be a very good indicator of teacher impact of teaching. So regulators would expect a kind of a clear link between teacher development and student achievement, whether that's through assessment results or learner engagement. So also you mentioned, and rightly so, Shameem also mentioned, this idea of these one-off workshops that are training workshops. I was delighted to hear training only mentioned once in this webinar. The one-off workshops are really, they're not working, they don't have impact. And I think that was also mentioned in one of your quotes from the very beginning, Bushra. Andy, you mentioned the importance of having access to theory and going through a few stages where it finally ends with this cognitive conversation that really allows the teachers to see what they've started with, the impact is now that is now having with students. And I have seen so many classes where the training has taken place. The box can be ticked, the students are put onto their centers, but there's no collaboration, there's no inquiry-based learning. It's very rote and very staged, and it's very sad to see, actually. It's, you know, the training didn't have an impact. And I think a lot of it has come because the lack of understanding is there, and the tweaking with it for your own style is not there. And having those conversations, those coaching and cognitive conversations throughout are so important. So you need to have those professional learning communities. You've mentioned that peer collaboration, which is with the, as AI evolves, and we start moving it into classrooms, both for teachers and students, that kind of peer collaboration, student collaboration is going to be so important. And from a regulatory point of view, is the PD tailored to the needs of the individual teachers? Well, it should be. And I think that's where your product is so important. The fact that you're bringing that in, you're working with the teacher, and I think that's going to be very important. And finally, that strong instructional leadership. Again, we're going back to that heads. They are now becoming more involved in and supporting and monitoring the impact of the PD, not just delivering the PD. So tailoring it to the individual teacher, that's knowing your teacher, knowing the PD, marrying that together, and then looking at the impact of that. And so regulators would also look for clear mechanisms to be able to track participation. So that comes out through the school development plans. How are you going to measure the impact? How are you going to track it? How are you going to monitor it? And how are you going to determine whether it's been effective or not? So that's pretty much what I would say any regulator and in this part of the world would be looking at.
Thank you so much, Josephine, for tying it together and showing us how compliance and meeting regulators' expectations is so tied to best practice. We're all working towards the same goals. We're all measuring success. There are only a couple of ways you can do that in this scenario, and that we're all looking at those aspects. So thank you so much for kind of bringing that together for us. We definitely, I think it deserves a longer conversation as well in terms of how thoughtfully IRIS Connect is approaching AI, and the fact that you recently won that Responsible Use of AI Award in Education as well, which goes to show the entire, from the foundation of the platform until date, how thoughtful and how teacher-centric it really is. However, in the interest of time, let's round off today's discussion. The last question is for Irum. So Irum, how is EduEnhance shaping its offerings to meet both school and teacher level needs, especially in the regional context with IRIS Connect?
Thank you, Bushra. So certainly it's a very interesting conversation and we could go on for hours, but I don't think our attendees would want to stay back for so long. But having said that, listening to all the panelists and the different lens, that is what we wanted to do in this conversation. Because in our region, we do understand we are unique in the way we are. It's a very diverse population. Teachers are coming from different parts of the world. We have different frameworks from the regulatory authorities. So we have a lot of reasons why we wanted to have a platform that could be customized, that could be localized, and where we have the faith and the research to show that this is the right platform for us. However, this is what our local market needs, and therefore we are able to localize it accordingly. So for example, we are looking at pathways, localized pathways on the IRIS Connect platform, where we are talking about getting ready for inspection. We are talking about what is the science of reading. So these are topics that are very relevant and important for our part of the world. And because of the flexibility with IRIS Connect, we'll be able to bring those customized solutions or pathways to our educators here. Also, in terms of the privacy, the data, confidentiality, we've been very mindful, very intentional. And again, a reason why we've gone with IRIS Connect is the certification and the confirmation that we have from the developers about the data privacy regulations that we have to follow here. So I think I would say, as to wrap up our conversation, it's an absolute pleasure to bring something to our part of the world where we feel, based on our research, our experience, our conversations with different stakeholders, that this would pretty much meet the needs and the requirements of our regional educators, and feel that this is something that we are bringing to support them, not to inundate them, not to bring more to their plates, but to actually take away that extra labor, extra work that sometimes goes in for teachers.
Thanks a lot, Irum. So first of all, heartfelt thanks to all our panelists for making time for this conversation and for contributing as well to our understanding of this very important topic. A heartfelt thanks as well to our attendees for staying an additional 15 minutes longer to enjoy this conversation. And we hope you found it beneficial. We look forward to your feedback through the feedback form and to having more of such conversations in the future. And also a heartfelt thanks to Anam, our team member who set this all up, was managing all the technical aspects of this and ensured it ran smoothly. So thank you as well, Anam. And with that, wishing everybody a lovely evening and hope to see you again sometime. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Lovely meeting you now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Lovely meeting you.